Yes, there have been passages of play where England have scrapped, but those have been few and far between. And the prospect of a series whitewash is all too real now. The inquest has already begun and we attempt our own post-mortem here on WION. Former England international and 2009 Ashes winner Monty Panesar joins me now from Luton, just outside of London. Monty, thanks for your time. How surprised have you been by this abject surrender? Let's be honest, England were always going to struggle to win a series in Australia, but the manner of the defeat has been rather painful.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show. Yeah, it's kind of, surprised a few people with the way England have, lost these games. And I think it probably started off when Joe Root, won the toss in Brisbane and possibly should have bowled overcast conditions. And Stuart Broad should, I think, played at the Gabba. And then Jimmy Anderson, obviously likely, is a better bowler, away from the Gabba. He doesn't have a great record there. So there were some selection issues there, which were a little bit surprising. And then also the lack of frontline spinner. I think throughout the whole year, this year, I think England haven't really prioritised, the development of a frontline spinner in Test cricket because they just feel that at the moment there isn't probably anyone there to do that. And obviously Jack Leach is a good bowler on turning pitches, but he's brought up on Somerset pitches and you can see why he was successful in India. In Australia, the skill is slightly different. You've got to control that one end and the attitude towards spin as well. In the second Test match where, spin was, playing a huge part, Nathan Lyon, I think, bowled over 25 overs out of the 80, while England only had 20 overs from 150 overs, allocated. And that was Joe Root bowling. So generally, I think the attitude towards spin is that I just don't feel that England believe that they have a frontline spinner who can do a defensive and an attacking role. And that's why they tend to go for part-timers in England, but then they get found out when you're away from England that you actually need a frontline spinner. Once that ball starts to stop swinging, you need someone to control from one end.
Yes, there seem to be missing frontline spinners like Monty Panesar and Graeme Swann. But there are lots of reports swirling around, Monty, that head coach Chris Silverwood is set to become the sort of fall guy for this debacle. He's also out of the fourth test in Sydney after a COVID scare. So perhaps that is going to take him out of the firing line and ease the pressure a wee bit?
Well, I think he'll be disappointed not to be there at the fourth test match. But again, it'll take him away from the limelight and opportunity to assess situations. I think there's been a bit of a reluctancy or a resistance, to really sort of, give meaningful, I think, answers in the media about, some of the mistakes they possibly made or selection errors. And it's possibly after the Ashes, when they review the whole system, maybe we'll see a bit more detailed, interview from Chris Silverwood. But you can understand that in the heat of the battle, you probably just want to be focusing on the cricket. And also the other issue is, he's been given so much power by Ashley Giles since Ed Smith, was kind of relieved from his duties in April as a national selector. That since then, I think they've lost sort of 6 test matches in taking sort of both roles. Maybe that probably that system is not working either. So I think going forward, they probably need to look at appoint a national selector, and also the way Owen Morgan gets his best white ball players. I just don't think Joe Root has been given the same freedom or the same privileges like Owen Morgan has for Test cricket. So I think for 2022 they've got to prioritise, red ball cricket in England.
Yes, rotation has been a fairly contentious topic in English cricket. But is it fair to single out someone like a Chris Silverwood for what has essentially been a complete batting failure, Monty?
Well, he's a decent, honourable man and he's extremely hard-working. And, he's got, if you look at it, he's a head coach who specialises in fast bowling. And throughout the Ashes, it's the bowlers who, have performed really well. But the batting has been an issue. And then you look at the India-South Africa series and you ask yourself the question, why is it that the Indian batsmen have good techniques and able to adapt to, helpful surfaces, but the England players are not? And it may be just the fact that county cricket games are played early April and then end of September. And then that bulk period in the middle period, which is June, July, August, it's, the schedule is consumed by white ball cricket. And I think that's the area where they need to play more red ball cricket so the batsmen can learn how to build an innings, how to stop having low hands, because at the moment the schedule is accommodating, the medium pacers who bowl 75, 80 miles per hour, and the batsmen are too scared to get out either LBW or bowled, rather than actually learn how to construct an innings. And they just don't get that opportunity to do that. So that's one area that they probably will have to look into, producing flatter, firmer pitches. So the younger batsmen, especially coming through the system, learn how to bat, longer periods of time in a 4-day match.
Okay, they could go with the youth, but the big question is this: do England have better players waiting in the wings, or is this the best they can do? In which case, there isn't much to discuss, is it?
Well, there are a few, young players coming through the system who have shown, the aptitude to bat long and the temperament to build an innings. But we just need to see more players coming through. And the reason simple being is that if you're going to have pitches that, you just kind of kiss the surface and there's a lot of grass on the wicket, it's going to stop the fast bowlers, to come into the game. It's easier actually to hit bowlers like the Australian attack on these green helpful services, because the ball just kind of sits up, and then it's the ones who, 75 miles per hour bowlers that you don't face at international level tend to get bulk of the wickets. The batsmen are not going to learn, how to play at international test level. So there needs to, the gap between the domestic and international cricket, it is obviously getting bigger, and it's very much to do with the scheduling. The scheduling has to change, and the coaching methods as well. Sometimes, we don't see in Indian cricket, people have triggers or whatever. They keep it so simple, their movements and their techniques, and they have really strong basics. And that's something that I think in English cricket we need to see, get back to the basics. And there was a sort of a theme going around in English cricket that you need to bat off stump. And that was duly the fact, because people don't want to get LBW because of these sort of pitches. And it's taking you away from the basics. And I think it's just trying to, revisit cricket is played, how it used to be played 100 years ago, with good, strong techniques. And that's where I think, we need to, reconnect.
Yes, back to the basics. That's what Joe Root was asking of his team in the lead up to the Melbourne Test. But how does Root himself survive this then? Because, he's called the shots on the field. Some of his decisions have been criticized. And as Jeffrey Boycott said a few days back, 9 defeats in a calendar year means that he hasn't been able to get a grip on the team and stop the slide.
Well, it's been difficult for him, but he's kind of like, it's remarkable to see how he's able to, when he bats, he puts his batting head on, and he's performed so well throughout the year. In terms of captaincy, he just hasn't been supported by, the batters. The bowling, I think they've done well, throughout the test matches, apart from maybe in India where the spinning pitches are difficult. But apart from that, I think throughout the year, I think the bowlers have probably supported Joe Root as they needed to be done, but it's just been the top order batsmen. They've continually, we've seen over, probably 50% of the first inning scores have been, under 250. Only once they've gone, above 400 this year. And they've had the most starts, since 1998. So this is obviously a concern. And, they're just not producing, test quality batsmen and the techniques that come with it. And part of that, is to do with, structural issues. They had a great, plan to make sure England was a strong in ODI cricket and T20, which they've achieved. But also it's the planning and the preparation. The likes of why was Ben Stokes allowed to go to the IPL when the Ashes is an important series for this year? And that's something that maybe when in 2023, and they're playing in England, that'll be an easier one for them to prepare for, because Australia haven't won in England for over 20 years. But then when Australia lose in England, the gaps, is not as huge margins. And maybe for them, for that particular year, they make sure their key players are ready for the Ashes.
Okay, you think the key players should be ready for the Ashes, okay. But we're going to have to pause for effect here, Monty, because 9 defeats in a calendar year. How humiliating is that for a cricket team that, let's be fair, has some pretty impressive talent? This is England we're talking about, not Papua New Guinea, who made their debut in the T20 World Cup.
Well, it is disappointing to see, because, the bread and butter for English cricket is Test cricket. That's where the big bucks are coming from. And they've got to get back, on focusing that, rather than, the 100 has been a huge success. And I think they should continue with that, because it's helping the women's game. And we'll probably see more international cricketers come next year play because of, the pandemic this year. But then Joe Root needs to also demand, from the ECB bosses and say, look, I want my best 11, like Owen Morgan gets his best team. I want my best team available. And rest and rotation policy didn't work, and there are players out there who actually, they are desperate to play Test cricket, and they know if they're injured or if they're too tired. But England should be, always looking to play their best 11, regardless of, who they're playing against and the schedule.
But isn't that how a Test series is to be approached? You go in with your best 11. Also, Monty, for all this talk about 9 defeats in 2021, just going through the numbers, it's staggering to believe that England won their first 3 Test matches this year. There was 2 in Sri Lanka and the first one in India, and just the one after that in 12 Tests, of which 6 were at home.
Well, there's a huge reliance on Joe Root. If you look at in all the Test wins, Joe Root scored very heavily, and he scored, I think, double hundreds, and they were big hundreds. But then it becomes a pattern, doesn't it? Like throughout this year, the second best is Rory Burns with 500 runs, and we've got, Joe Root, the gap is over 1,100 runs, and that huge reliance on one person, after a while, becomes the pattern. That's the pattern for this England team. Joe Root score the runs, will support him, and then the bowlers will do the job. But then when he fails, the other players haven't been in these sort of positions throughout the year, so they find it slightly more uncomfortable. And other teams know. They know if we get Joe Root as the key wicket, we can put this England team under pressure. So they need to, in a way, devise a strategy, a sporting strategy for red ball cricket after the Ashes is over. But they've still got 2 Test matches to go where they need to salvage some pride and, compete against this Australian side.
You're speaking about Joe Root. There's already word emerging from Australia that Root will stay on. It seems more like there is no alternative, or the Tina factor at play here, with Ben Stokes still finding his way back, and perhaps after the series, no other contender ready to take over from Root.
Yeah, Joe Root still is the number 1 person to, captain England, and it's really up to him if he wants to do so after the Ashes. But I'm sure the ECB would want to, and his teammates, they know he's a fine leader, and they would want him to, marshal the troops for next year. So I think he is the right person still to, do that. I think the concern is going to be, when the Test matches start in June versus New Zealand, will they have the batters in May? Will the pitches be flat enough for them to actually score the runs, build their confidence and their techniques so they're ready for June? And we don't want to go back to the same mistakes where the Red Bull games are early in April to accommodate some of the ODI cricket in May. I think they need to prioritise county championship games first, and then build the schedule around that.
Monty, listening to you, I'm trying to wrap my head around the reasons for this capitulation. At the start of the series, both teams were under a fair bit of pressure. It was evenly spread out. England were singed by the Yorkshire racism scandal, and Australia were rocked by Tim Paine's resignation 2 weeks before the first Test. Yet, despite losing their captain and having a new man at the helm, they showed the resolve to bounce back.
Well, Australia have always been strong in their home conditions, and they've got a really strong bowling department. But at the start of the series, there was a reluctancy, from even in the England team too, for if this tour was going to go ahead. There were some reservations, but then due to financial pressure and how important the Ashes is for Test cricket, it was important that this does go ahead. And you can even see now with the Cricket Australia authorities, we had one case with Big Bash and the game was off, but we had 7 cases of COVID, positive results. But they still got the Ashes ahead. So you can see from a financial perspective and, for the future of Test cricket, it's important that we have these 2 Test matches to go ahead. There's a fear that there could be other cases coming through, but let's hope that's not the case and the 4th Test match does go ahead. And then especially when you see how India have done really well in Test cricket, there's a nation who's doing well in T20 and ODI, as well as the red ball cricket, and it's very much to do with the structure, the system, how people are coached, and that's something probably in England needs to be reviewed as well.
Are we also guilty of discounting the fatigue factor, Monty? We seem to be going very hard at England, but there have been a lot of rotations within the England Test team, as you mentioned. But 15 tests since the start of the year, some of it within tight COVID bubbles. Some players have also featured across formats and in the IPL as well. So it's been a packed year.
Yeah, look, I think the travelling is a huge issue, and but then when you have specialist players for playing just Test cricket, then you can accommodate that. But I think generally what we're seeing in our domestic game is that it's easier for players to earn, I think, the bigger bucks playing T20 global leagues, and you see a lot of English players in the Big Bash recently. There's 3 players who were Man of the Match awards. They're playing in IPL cricket now. We've got the Pakistan Super League, even in the Sri Lankan League as well. So cricketers who may not able to be good enough to play Test cricket, they quickly make their mind up and think, right, can I become a global T20 player? And that's what I think a lot of the domestic players are beginning to do that. And especially new format of the 100, it's actually encouraging the young players to be this sort of global white ball cricketer.
Okay, you're mentioning T20 leagues, you're mentioning the 100, but when you're playing across formats, how do you explain the timid way, in a sense, England are playing their Test cricket in sharp contrast to the aggressive approach that we see in one-day internationals, where it is hit the ball from the word go and regularly score 300 or chase 300 down with ease?
Well, I think it's because, the huge, hostility factor in Australia can sometimes, some of the younger players, they haven't experienced that level of pressure playing cricket or international level, that they can, be intimidated by it. And especially with the pace that they bowl, the relentless lengths that the Australian teams have produced this summer during the Ashes, they probably haven't faced that level of bowling in county cricket. So it'll be good for them, going forward. But, in the remaining Test matches, England may even just look at the youth to see, the ones which they could invest in the longer term, that give them the games and see how they take on the pressures during this Ashes series.
Okay, but since we are doing this extensive post-mortem, I have to ask you this, Monty, and it may be a bit harsh, that do you think if England are in danger of sort of completely falling off the pace in Test cricket, like we have seen the West Indies and to an extent Sri Lanka and South Africa over the last 4 or 5 years for various reasons?
Well, look, this England team, they're a good team in England conditions, swinging, seaming, they're familiar to that. But I think away from England, that could be, where and in particular with the West Indies series coming up, it'll be interesting to see how England play against West Indies in their home conditions. That will be, I think, probably a good leveler to see where is English cricket, really at. Because I think recent times they're not a good team, away from England. But in England, they do play competitive cricket, and it's because it suits their conditions and their style of play. But moving forward, for this England team to be successful, we may just need to produce harder, flatter, firmer pitches that then allows the spinners to play in the third and the fourth day. They learn how to play a defensive and attacking role, produce maybe more faster bowlers who hit the deck a bit more, and sort of, the medium pacers are there, but they don't play such a bigger role in county cricket like they're doing at the moment. And then the young batsmen, they learn how to build an innings like you do in test level. So the pitches being from similar to test, cricket, I think will help to revive English cricket where it needs to be.
You were mentioning England going in with youth, and you're saying that perhaps they should blood youth in the remaining 2 games. But let's not forget that they've gambled in a sense by making 4 changes for the Melbourne Test, and it didn't quite work out. Do you see a whitewash now as inevitable, considering that Australia have found their mojo, and as Pat Cummins said, they're definitely not looking to go for the kill?
Yeah, look, all Australian teams who win the Ashes by the 3rd Test will be looking for a 5-0 whitewash, and it increasingly looks likely that England could lose this 5-0. But it's the manner of the defeat. The last sort of 11, I think, Test matches they've lost in Australia have been huge margins. Over 200 runs, by an innings. If they can close that gap and see some of the younger players or some players that are given a go to actually grab this opportunity and show their skills. That's what they want to see, because England will be now looking at investing in the future, and these 2 test matches are vital for the players who are playing. They need to perform well and take on how hard it is, that environment in Australia, that it can be for any cricketer. It's also a lot of character, and that someone like Jimmy Anderson has in abundance. His performances in Melbourne were probably the best he's bowled in Australia. And he will be a guy who, I think the England team will rely on, marshalling the troops and bringing that inspiration, motivation, and saying to the guys, come on, guys, this could be, between, could make or break for some of you youngsters. Use this opportunity to really embrace it and show how good you are. And, he could be that guy where this England team could, look upon.
We're sitting here at the end of 2021 talking about, what's gone wrong for England. But just go back 365 days or so, at the start of 2021, the decline in Australian cricket seemed pretty obvious, with India winning that series over there with a completely rookie bowling attack and a patched up lineup, if I could call it that. Have England woken up the sleeping giant, with Pat Cummins now saying that he wants to see his team piggyback this performance and resume world domination, which we haven't seen for a while?
Well, that's always going to be against India. India is the team at the moment, I think, is the strongest team in all formats. And we may even see someone like Virat Kohli, once he finishes captaincy as Test cricketer, it could be the most successful Test captain ever. And up there with Steve Waugh. And I think that's probably what he would like to be remembered. When people say, who were the greatest Test captains ever? Virat Kohli, Steve Waugh, Graham Smith, Ricky Ponting, Nasser Hussain. This is a sort of area he would like, himself to be there. Michael Vaughan as well. So I think for him, that will be a big accolade. And, I think we will always know how good Australia are is when they play against India. That is always the big series. And they may need to, we may even just see a change now, that actually the bigger series is India versus Australia. In Australia, 5 Test series, everyone was glued to their screens. It was probably the most entertaining Test cricket we've seen for a long time in Australia. And the India team took them on. They weren't afraid. They were saying, we will not get bullied by you, and we are going to beat you in your own backyard. Doesn't matter which 11 we put out. And that's what they did.
Yes, we already think, Monty, that's the biggest sort of series in world cricket for us. But, these are tough times for English cricket. And thank you for being extremely honest in your assessment of what's gone wrong. We do hope that for the sake of a contest in Test cricket, that England find a way to fix their problems and bounce back. Or else, as you were saying, it gets too predictable as things stand. Wishing you a very happy new year. May it also usher in a new start, a new revival for England's Test team as well.
Thank you very much. And Happy New Year. Thank you.